When the guns fell silent over the battlefields of the Great War, America reverted back to its isolationist ways. However, the so-called Roaring Twenties eventually came to a screeching halt, with the stock market crash in 1929, plunging the American economy into chaos, driving many people into grinding poverty and out of employment. Despite what President Hoover tried to do to save the economy, it was not until the coming of Franklin Delano Roosevelt into the office of president that positive shifts started having an effect.
Social security. We believe in work for the unemployed. We believe in saving homes. Cross our hearts and hope to die. We believe in all these things. But we do not like the way the present administration is doing them. Just turn them over to us. We will do all of them. We will do more of them. We will do them better. And most important of all, the doing of them will not cost anybody anything.
Indeed, the economy began improving. However, in the eyes of many Americans, FDR's so-called New Deal, which promised to get America back to work, would end up only expanding the framework of the government far beyond its constitutional limits. Naturally, the first to use this issue to acquire high profile in popular politics were the fascists of the Silver Legion, predicting a communist takeover of America. This rhetoric intensified after Roosevelt suspended all surveillance and persecution of various left-wing activists and communist groups, as has been the standard since the 1920s, politically characterized by the Red Scare. With the passing of the Union Representation Act and the desegregation of the armed forces of the United States, many peculiar occurrences began happening on a semi-regular basis. US armies were getting raided, with lots of valuable equipment being lost. Industrialists began shifting production from one part of the country to another. Soldiers began deserting their units. When FDR's cabinet got in contact with the Weyer Group, a revolutionary vanguard modeled upon Leninist principles, Silver Legion protesters began demanding a people's trial against traitors of the United States and the American people. What fueled right-wing paranoia in the United States by now was the fact that the Union Representation Act allowed the president to stack both the House and the Senate with his allies. As far as the president's opposition was concerned, the political path to expressing their grievances was closed off by the increasing number of FDR's cronies. The tension in the country was palpable. State governors ordered local businesses to stop paying their taxes to the federal government as an act of protest against the communist takeover. Eventually, the pressure got to a critical point. In the Deep South, the governor of Alabama proclaimed the state's secession from the communist-infested federal government. Soon enough, the entirety of the former Confederacy had seceded from the Union. To avoid fighting, the whole of the Steel Belt also seceded, but not to fight the federal government, but only to avoid the bloodshed. Seeing how FDR was no longer fit to be president in light of the recent crisis of legitimacy of the federal government, and impeachment was in short order. As a result, Earl Browder, the chairman of the Communist Party, became the president of the new Communist States of America.
Events and issues are beginning to stand out so that they can be seen by the masses. You don't have to give long-winded explanations anymore. The people see, the people understand. What they need is a voice to express it for them and an organization to rally them. And the people are going to march forward. With the people will belong the victory.
In late January of 1939, the first shots of the Second American Civil War were fired.
Which side are you on? Come all of you good people, you women and you men. Once more our backs are to the wall, under attack again.
Ready for medals!
To defend our rights, we're gonna have to fight again. So I'll ask you here tonight, now, which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Boys, which side are you on? Well, it's time for decision.
Nailed it!
was just a little thing. I used to love parades with banners, bands, red balloons, and maybe lemonade. When I came home one May, my neighbor's father said, "Them marches is all commies, tell me kid, are you a red?" Well, I didn't know just what he meant, my hair back then was brown. Our house was plain red brick like most others in the town. So I went and asked my mama why our neighbor...
Many volunteers from the liberated states began joining up with the new Communal Army of America. It was painfully obvious that they were only joining to avoid being punished for choosing the wrong side of history. However, they were incorporated into the new army, given a chance to redeem themselves after being led astray by the fascists and capitalists. In September of 1939, the Confederacy has capitulated, for a second time now. Soon enough, the neutral bloc proclaimed allegiance to the new revolutionary government of the Communist States of America. The country could now begin rebuilding, now that there was nobody and nothing to stand in the way of desegregation of American daily life and all government institutions.
You're bound to hear it said, so you might as well ignore it or love the word instead, cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red. When I was living on my own, one apartment that I had a lousy rotten landlord, let me tell you he was bad. But when he tried to throw me out, I rubbed my hands and said, you haven't seen a struggle if you haven't fought a red. And you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you've marched or agitated, you're bound to hear it said. So you might as well ignore it or love the word instead, cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red. Well, I kept on agitating now, cause what else can you do? You're gonna let the sons of bitches walk all over you. My friend said you'll get fired hanging with that commie mob. I should be so lucky, buddy, I ain't got a job. Well, you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you've marched or agitated, then you're bound to hear it said. So you might as well ignore it or love the word instead, cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red. While I've been agitating now for 50 years or more for jobs, for equality, and always against...
Immediately after the dust settled after the brief civil war, Earl Browder petitioned for the CSA to join forces with the Communist Internationale and the origin point of the Red Revolution, Russia. After that, using the nationalization of Mexican oil as casus belli, the American army crossed the Mexican border, with the invasion ending in March of 1940.
And you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you've marched or agitated, then you're bound to hear it said. So you might as well ignore it or love the word instead, cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red.
Despite the fact that the CS won and achieved a great success in its expedition, the Communal Army demonstrated much strength, but not enough familiarity with an actual war, despite also emerging victorious out of the Civil War, which ended too quickly before any valuable lessons could be learned from it. Many preparations and reforms to Communal Army Command would be needed before the CS could take on a bigger target. That target were the European empires which still held territories in the Americas. Even though before, Browder denounced the Monroe Doctrine as an imperialist tool of the old capitalist America, it did provide a useful framework through which war with the Europeans could be justified. By late 1940, it would be almost criminal not to take this chance too. Britain was on the back foot against German fascism, with France having fallen to the German onslaught. And so, on October 12th of 1940, the CSA declared war on the British Empire and the forces of the counter-revolution.
What's a life and freedom worth when a tyrant seeks our earth, aiming to subdue our land with greedy hand? But we'll stand against his might, Canada won't yield this fight, and will shout across our free
Elevation
and sovereign
1205.
land. Go home, Yankee, Yankee, go home. Keep your deals and go back home. Your grand schemes don't tread on our hopes and dreams. As our anthem proudly sings, Canada stands.
By June of 1941, all British and Canadian forces were wiped out, with some major cities having fallen without a fight. Now the primary goal for the communal army was somehow reaching the British Isles. Luckily, this task was simplified by the fact that the British Navy would be too distracted by the German and Italian navies to concentrate on defending the northern approaches to the home islands. However, the British Isles would then need to be defended against a new immediate threat, the Germans, as they were also at war with America and the Soviet Union.
Goodbye to the crown, goodbye to the royal we and all its famous pedigree. Let's put this dog to sleep. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown. Farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown. Farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown. Farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown. Farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown.
A cold winter's morn in 1641, my lovely Anne was taken by O'Conn, taken on the file at the point of rebel gun, and drunk it in the murky river band. Hundreds more were taken at this date, but sure the grind are buried in the sand. O'Neill's false promises ensured the same fate. I cursed his papist army to a man. Then one day horizon I did see 100 of our ships all coming to my land. And off he stepped, protector of the realm, and he smiled and placed the sword into my hand. Off we marched in Crusade to Aston's guarded town. Together we stormed it with Cromwell at the helm. He screamed a few butchers, remember poured it down, and Cromwell, protector of the realm. And now I go with flowers to see my lovely Anne. I go and tell her that her death was not in vain. I tell my children about the Lord Protector and how he saved our people from the same. Britain has had some brilliant kings and queens, Elizabeth the First, and Alfred comes to mind. But the Lord Protector emulates them all.
By summer of 1942, a beachhead was secured in Scotland. However, British resistance only got stiffer in the mountains. But against American naval might, there was nothing the British imperialists could do.
For his people and he rid us of O'Neill, as we took our due revenge for Gotterdammerung. Cromwell, the greatest British king, strong in his beliefs, he never let us down. He fought for his people and he rid us of O'Neill, as we took our due revenge for Gotterdammerung.
By August, British defenses have completely fallen apart, securing Britain as a launching pad for an invasion to mainland Europe to open up a second front against the Nazis. However, the Communal Army Command decided to quickly secure Ireland to prevent the forces of the counter-revolution from gathering on the Emerald Isle too. On November 19th, American forces landed in German-occupied France with no resistance by the enemy. By April of 1943, the remains of the Maginot Line and the Siegfried Line were breached by the Americans. However, the further east they went, the stiffer German resistance became, until the front line became a stalemate. September, it was decided that in order to bypass the hard German lines, the communal army will invade the remnants of the French state, invade Italy, and then invade Germany from the south. However, by February of the next year, Axis reinforcements have arrived en masse to halt American advance in the Alps, where the spearhead of the American invasion of southern France, tanks, became easy targets for enemy infantry. In the north, a major siege began centered around the town of Cuxhaven, with German resistance being especially difficult to smoke out for the experienced Americans. It was here where the Americans first noticed that the Germans are using units of non-German nationalities, throwing them into the meat grinder first before letting Germans succumb to a communist bullet.
Sabotage!
Das wäre einer weniger. Ich will nicht.
Despite their stubborn defense, the Americans simply grinded down the coastal towns street by street, even managing to break through to the surrounding forces in Hamburg. Having reached Kiel, the communal army was able to secure a direct line between the eastern and western fronts. General Patton's tank army was redeployed into the Soviet-occupied East Prussia. The eastern front had many gaps in it, allowing Patton's tanks to roll across the Great European Plain straight into Berlin, which fell on November of 1944. Not too long after, on December 18th, the German state and all German armed forces have capitulated to the combined Soviet and American advance, leaving only Italy and the Balkans to liberate from fascism. In June of 1945, the Axis had capitulated. The continent was utterly devastated by the constant fighting. However, there was still an enemy left to finish off: Imperial Japan, which had been at war with the Soviet Union for many years now. The undersupplied, underfed, and under-equipped Japanese garrison on the Korean peninsula was quickly overrun by the Americans. However, the Japanese government refused to capitulate. Therefore, it was decided to pull out a weapon that had been in the works since the late 30s, since even before the Communist Revolution. A weapon that was said to be able to use the power of the sun itself, and could wipe out whole cities within minutes with a single blast. The Japanese were warned that if they do not surrender, this weapon will be used on their home islands. After the silence from the Japanese side following this ultimatum, the order was given for the bombers to start their engines on November 20th of 1945. On January 5th, the Americans had landed in Japan. What few forces tried to resist the American onslaught surrendered. The war was over. Japan became a satellite regime of the CSA. Western Europe too was now under American influence. A single thought had crossed the minds of both Browder and Stalin. Both understood what was going to happen next. Browder's decision not to be ruthless to the enemies of the revolution, like the neutral bloc and volunteers during the brief civil war, sparked a debate in Moscow, resulting in Stalin proclaiming that America was not an ally of the Soviet Union, but that they were revisionists and traitors of the working class. At the same time, Browder proclaimed that the Soviet Union was a union of traitors to the working class revolution, with Stalin having turned the ideology of the original revolution into a red fascism and just a new iteration of Russian imperialism. After such harsh words about yesterday's allies, it was obvious that the two communist powers could no longer be together in a single space. Browder proclaimed that America was leaving the Communist Internationale to form something new, and truthful to Marx's and Lenin's vision. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was founded. The world was now set in stone. Democratic socialism in North America and Western Europe, and Stalinism in the East. The world was now forever different. There was no more unity among communists worldwide anymore. It was now either Browderism or Stalinism. The entire non-communist world now lived in fear of either Soviet invasion or American destruction from the sky, having to survive on a planet dominated by communism, in a war with no rules or honor. A Cold War, where the Third World was nothing but pawns in the hands of the two superpowers.